Welcome back, Tool Talk fans. This will be the final build of the axles for that series of videos I've been making. This will be number 7. Now, in the first 6, I covered how to set up gears, how to set up lockers, and how to set up the actual ARB airlines. But today we're actually doing the ARB 35 spline install, and this comes with all your hardware. Of course, it came with the front axle, but also we'll cover the 35 spline shafts that come with this kit. These are the beefier 1.5 inch shafts. We'll do a comparison here in a minute when I get everything apart, and I'll kind of break down what we're talking about here. And so stay tuned. There's a lot to be covered today. Start with jacking the truck up. We're going to move on to the axle. Before we do that, we want to put in some support under the axle so that we don't have just everything resting on the jacks. So we're going to put some jack stands in. Using a T30 bit, just crack these loose on both sides. Using 18 millimeter, you're going to break this and break this loose, and that will remove the brake caliper. All right, using 8 millimeter, we're going to remove the ABS sensor. You're going to have to do this anyway because we're replacing axle shafts. If you weren't replacing your axle shafts, I mean, you're still going to have to remove this, but because you have to pull the axles to get the diff out, but you're going to want to pull that no matter what. And take your brake caliper and zip tie it up out of the way. Bend this back enough to get it just to clear that, and then you're going to pop that out of there, and that is your e-brake release cable. All right, camera helper, thank you so much for my daughter to help me out with the camera work. All right, so we're going to pull this off after we've removed the bolt that holds this on with the Torx bit, and we've already pulled the caliper off, and the neighbor is doing yard work. We're going to go ahead and just pull this off. So I just loosen it up a little bit, and that is how you pull caliper off. Now here is where the meat and potatoes of our 35 spline shafts. These are the stock units. We're going to compare these to the 35 spline units. All right, and these are just 4 18 millimeter bolts. 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're just going to lose the left one bolt, or the nut, up here so that when this wheel's around, it doesn't come off there. Give me a little bit extra set of hands so I can create this video for you. And so we got all 4 of these bolts off down here. Everything's nice and loose. All right, so before you pull this shaft out, they say don't use a claw hammer because you're not building a house, but this claw hammer is really neat because you can push this button in and flip this back to create yourself a nice little pry tool. So you're just gonna pry these out, and the bolts will slip out. And then as you pull out the brake, this shaft will come out. Right, so at this point, you're just gonna, after the shaft's out, you're gonna take this thing out. So it's kind of machined to fit that flanged area. Set this down, and then inside here's the race, and your bearings are already on the shaft because they're pressed on. So this actually just slides out. Should just slide out. It's not a real tight tolerance. So the new shaft and everything will slide in there after I clean it up a little bit. That's literally, it's that easy. So we're going to move on to the differential. In order to get to the diff, you're going to have to remove the sway bar here. The links, you can leave those alone. We're just going to hit these 4 bolts and those 4 bolts, and then zip tie it up here. All right, take these off using 15 millimeter sockets. All right, so we're going to pull this bolt, this bolt, this bolt, and this bolt with 15 millimeter, and these caps will come out. You're just annotating that when you put the caps back on, one side's bigger than the other, so you can't mess that up. And then when you put the caps back on, these arrows are pointing outboard. All right, so this is set to 0. If I move it, there's almost 9 thousandths there. They really, from stock, I kind of feel like that's kind of sloppy. All right, guys, so I had to pull this out with a little bit of force, but we have the diff spreader on here and kind of opened it up a bit. It is harder on these thicker, large Dana 44 axles on the new trucks, but we got it out. So I'm gonna have to use 2 hands here to finish pulling this out. Should be wearing hearing protection. And that's how you save money on bearings, because the truck's 1,000 miles. I'm going to reuse them. So having the right tool makes all the difference. I was able to save the large bearing. I did a review on these. If you haven't seen it, go back and look at my other videos. This is no ordinary Dana 44. This is like a Dana 60 size bearing with these trucks, along with the new shafts that I have here. This is just, there's so much beef to this rear axle in the Dana 44s and the 2018 plus trucks and Jeep Wranglers, and Bronco eat your heart out. This thing is just a work of art. So let's continue the install. This comes out without a lot of fuss. You can even use a wrench on this. So you can go ahead and knock these out. Okay, so after we've removed the flange, how we did that was with, you'll need a set of pulley pullers, and you'll just stick that on there, and that'll drive out this flange, and it'll get right to the edge. And all I did was I added a socket to the end of this post on the pulley puller. Just put a socket on the end of there just to give it another extra ½ inch. And then you'll put it against this and then drive that with the big DeWalt tool. Stuck the nut on there, and then just using a hammer, which I have here. I got a number 3-pound hammer, and pop that in there. If you want a real close rundown or a full tutorial of that, go look at my other videos. I have a full axle build. I'm going to go ahead and rip all this out, set up the pinions, spacing, and set everything up, put it back together. I'll catch you on the next clip. Taking the difference between the 2 pinions, got my new shim pack behind this race, and so you have the housing, the shim pack, and then the race. So that gives me my distance of the pinion in here, and then that will interact with the teeth on the ring gear. And then up here, I drilled a 7/16 hole and then tapped it. You can kind of see, I'll put my finger in there. That is for my ARB air locker, so the copper line will come out of here and then into there. So let's get to it. All right, unlike the front axle, this has taken an exuberant amount of time compared to the front. The front, I set it up one time, change the shim pack one time in the front. This one, I'm on like the 10th or 12th time I've changed the shim pack, and 3rd time I've changed the pinion pack. So this goes to show you, sometimes, man, when you're going to build these, you have to be ready for anything. So it is not as easy as the first one as I made it look. So be ready to have to go back and forth quite a bit. So several hours into this project. And we're right at 5. So we'll take several measurements as we spin the gear, and if they're all within 5, then I'm gonna check the gear pattern and we'll see if we can run it. At this point, kind of cut to the chase. I have took off the old bearings, the old axle nut that I was using to set up the, because it's pretty beat up. Took off the old axle nut, put the fresh seal on the back. Then I put on, there's a spacer in here, a kind of a washer on the back of the bearing. So I got fresh bearings, fresh spacer, crush collars inside here, fresh crush collar. Then I put on this flange and then a new nut with Loctite. I've got it set to, you can kind of get a feel for it, but I know setting up the other gears that this is about 40 inch-pounds of pressure. Since I've already kind of explained that in the other video, I'm not going to do that, so we're done here. All right, using my smaller 1/4 inch impact, this is in neutral transmission, the actual T-case. So I've got these all set up. I'm just going to finish putting these all down to spec. They weren't very tight when I pulled them, so I'm not going to crush them down, but they'll be good and tight. And that's it. When you're installing an ARB air locker, what you have is this new configuration of hardware that goes into the differential. So my differential is going to be, I'm going to cut a hole, and this is going to be my diff. Right here's the fitting, that's called the bulkhead fitting. Inside that goes the rubber, then the copper crush, and then the rubber. And this squeezes together inside here to give you a perfect seal from the oil and also the airline. Then this part screws down. There's a screw on the back of it. You'll screw this down into here, and this crushes, this has a threaded area that goes in here. This crushes this down on this is down on this, and this crushes against the bottom of the housing of this. This is your bulkhead fitting. Once that's all crushed in, then you can slip on your coupler. The coupler also has a crush fitting for your tube that comes in through here. The tube then slides all the way down to this area, over, and this goes through this area as well. So as this is pushed down, this little tube right here, this piece here, crushes down on this. And then inside there, you get your, it's called a compression fitting. And so if you want to, what's cool is they offered you this banjo fitting. This is just a banjo fitting you'd see on a brake line. And so you got a crush washer. This now will take the place of this onto here. And then this goes over here. And then all these pieces go into the back of that. And then you can go out the other direction. So you can have a 90-degree angle off your diff, or you can have the straight angle. This is the new generation of the new generation of ARB hardware that goes on with the new ARB lockers. All right, at this point, I'm just putting in the fitting, the bulkhead fitting for the air locker, and we're gonna run the line. All right, I'm gonna slide that on. And so right now we're just lining things up. We're not gonna bolt anything in, but you have to do that first before you put in these shafts. I wanted to talk real quick about this shaft, how it actually, if you pan down here, it actually gets smaller here, then it gets smaller here, it gets smaller here, and then you get your 32 spline shafts. These are for any of the Gladiators. This is including Rubicon. This is what you have in your Rubicon right now. What we have here is the 35 spline shaft. It doesn't come down at all. It's one solid piece, 1.5 inches all the way down. And these are 1541 forged shafts. So super beefy. And we're gonna slide these in and kind of get things lined up a little bit. And then we're good to go. All right, and for the moment of truth, we got the axle spinning freely, drive shafts connected, and we got the ARB. Let's turn the pump on and fire it up. All right, rear locker's on. Come back here. She's locked up. Test complete. All right, one last final assembly of the axle. You're going to hit 4 bolts with 18 millimeter. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the other side there. You're going to hit this with 8 millimeter. The tone ring actually sits next to this ABS sensor, so it kind of comes in here on a long plastic tube, and you'll look inside there. Just make sure your tone ring's not hitting your ABS sensor. And then finally, just snap this back into place. It just pops in there. And that is your e-brake / parking brake. All right, for the ends of the axle, we've already addressed these parts, but we want to pay attention to the 18 millimeter brake bolts. I used a caliper or C-clamp to push the pressure out so that I could get my brake back on there in case you stepped on your brake while you had it out of the truck. So that was just 2 bolts on that, threw the caliper back on. This one does not have a retaining bolt for the caliper on the Dutchman axle. I guess you could request to have that tapped or drilled, but it's really unnecessary as long as you're putting your wheel back on and everything's squared up, and then you can spin it and you can hear it. It's almost a shame we have to cover this up because you got those high performance axles in there, and there's really no way to differentiate your stock truck from an ARB air locker and 35 spline setup. So it's kind of cool parts, but they're all hidden. All right, the axle's all done. Everything that I can do to this point is complete. That includes putting the axle shafts in, torquing all these bolts, retorquing all the bolts on the ring gear to 150 foot-pounds. This is the rear end. I want to put this as strong as possible. And then I've got these torqued to 90 foot-pounds. They are actually, I believe, 85, but I went ahead and put a little bit extra on there. Checked my air lines. Everything is good to go. We are now going to put the diff cover on. And top your diff off with your favorite gear lube. So that's it. It's all buttoned up. It's been painted. Other than the East Coast Gear Supply sticker that's on the axle and behind the sway bar and the valve sticking out of the top of the housing, you really can't tell there's a whole lot different about it. But it's 35 splines now, and it has 48 gears and ARB air lockers. It's kind of subtle, but very, very cool. Well, guys, that's the end of it. Thanks for following me along on this journey. The axle went and checked out fine. Took it around for a test drive. Did find that the pinion nut was still a little loose, so I had to tighten that up because it does cause a little bit of whine on D-cell. So went and checked that out. Ends up being the #1 issue of gear whine on D-cell. Ends up being that the pinion nut is just a little too loose. So even just feeling it out, that I'm gonna leave that in there. In the video I was feeling it. I should have put the wrench on there and checked it to 40, 30 to 40 inch-pounds. But that's one of those lessons learned. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. I hope this does not deter you from not wanting to do your own gears. I think it just is time consuming. I have probably easily have, just in this rear axle, I have probably 10 hours. The front axle went together, it's just, the plan is aligned. Front axle was so easy. But this rear axle, Dana gear set, still a good gear set, but there was a huge gap from the initial gear set to the newest set. One was 0.059 and one was 0.019. So 40 thou difference. Ended up having to make up. Got it right on the first time, and then I added like 2 thou to it, a little bit more than what was recommended by Dana. But that gear set was not gonna get dead center like the front one did. The front one was like just rainbows and unicorns. But this one gave me a little bit more work. But if you're willing to try it, it almost becomes a puzzle, because once you get a feel for it, you can go back in and keep changing things without mess anything up, because these axles are great because the shims are all behind the race, so it's super easy to just pull out. So I hope you guys like this. Click like and subscribe, please, and I'll get you another video.